Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
When writer Tiffany Unique watched Hurricane Irma smack into the Caribbean, it immediately took her back. Unique is from the island of St. Thomas, and she was a high school student when Hurricane Marilyn hit in 1995.
School was out for months. There was no electricity for months. I remember standing in bread lines and getting MREs from the U.S. military. So I think these conditions are actually the kind of conditions that the Virgin Islands is going to be in for many months.
The history of the islands and how they're perceived in the popular imagination are very much a focus of Unique's writing. And she told me the islands don't get very much attention from Americans.
If Florida is dealing with a natural disaster and Texas is dealing with a natural disaster, the Virgin Islands is thought of as being one of those Caribbean islands, which we definitely are. We are a group of Caribbean islands, and we are Caribbean people. But we are America's Caribbean people,
right,
and America's Caribbean land, and we shouldn't be lumped in with the region when it comes to America giving us aid.
Right, but these islands are, in fact, they belong to the United States. In fact, you wrote this week in the New York Times, maybe you've heard of the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. John. It's a good place to go on vacation, to fall in love, to have a wedding. In fact, I even saw someone refer to these islands on a Facebook post recently as resort islands. But you write about the colonial history. So remind us how these islands became part of America.
I write about the Virgin Islands imperial history in depth in my novel, Land of Love and Drowning. In fact, in Land of Love and Drowning, I begin my novel with the transfer from Danish to U.S. rule. The Virgin Islands in 1917 was bought by the United States. Our thinking at the time in the Virgin Islands was that America was an economic powerhouse, and they were going to pay us a lot more economic attention. They were going to help us build up our economy. Of course, there were a few things that we didn't know in the Virgin Islands about the United States. One is pretty obvious. We didn't know that segregation existed in major ways. We didn't know what black and white racism looked like United States style. But the other thing that we didn't understand economically was that America was about to head into prohibition. And the Virgin Islands, our main economy up until that point had been the exportation of rum and rum products. So all of a sudden, our major economy is now illegal in our new nation. So the hopes that we had that we were going to integrate economically and benefit economically by being under the U.S. flag were just erased.
So a country that was bought by the United States 100 years ago, you're celebrating the centennial this year, and there are still so many other islands that are essentially controlled by European countries as well, like the Netherlands, France, and Britain, that were impacted by Irma. And we've seen a pattern in the response. How has the United States talked about it in your view?
The United States has talked about us as if we are effectively a colony, which is that we are secondary. We are perhaps secondary types of Americans. Now, we do carry American passports in the Virgin Islands, but we don't have federal representation. We cannot vote for president, for example. Our congresswoman, who we vote for her, She cannot vote in Congress, so we really have no say. But I also think that this has to do with just the way that we are thought of in the national imagination as a place for vacation and respite. And it's a beautiful place. The Virgin Islands is as beautiful as everybody says. It is a gorgeous, pristine, absolutely divine place. However, it's a place where human beings also live. So, when Americans travel to Europe, for example, they know that they're traveling to Europe to engage with the cultural history. When people travel to the Caribbean, they are often traveling to avoid the human beings and to just engage in the beauty of the space.
So they're in resorts, they're lying in the sun, they're drinking tropical rum-infused drinks, but they're not necessarily there for the culture or to talk to the people who live there.
Right. You go to the Caribbean to avoid other people. And in fact, often what people do is they ensconce themselves in these hotels where locals are not welcome. And so they just engage with the beauty of the space, but not with the intellectual import of the people.
So how has that impacted this response to Irma?
Well, I think what that has meant for Irma is that when the national media first began to finally pay attention to the Virgin Islands, we were paid attention to because tourists were being evacuated. And these tourists were being called the Americans, as if in the Virgin Islands, tourists and American are equal, when of course they are not. And Virgin Islanders were sitting back and hearing this coming through their news stations and seeing this online, those who had internet access, and were befuddled and astounded and frankly angry. If we're going to be talking about the Americans in the Virgin Islands, which we should be hearing from actual Virgin Islanders who are Americans.
Tiffany Yannick is an English professor at Wesleyan University. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Sunday, September 17th, 2017. So I have been told this is our global Sunday talk on racism. We try to do this once a month, or we have been doing this once a month for about a year or so, a little over a year now. We missed August because of, again, massive back problems. I didn't even have the wisdom teeth extraction thing at that point. It was just the back issues at the time. But thankfully, feeling better, back, ready to roll. And at a time, I would say it is important to make sure that we have a global understanding of white supremacy, that this is not just a problem. Consistently, what we say every time that we do this program, that this is not something that, this is just a problem every now and then in Florida, Georgia, or South Carolina, what have you. No, there is no place on this planet you can go, particularly if you are a black person, and think, I'm going to be treated well. I'm not going to be abused. There's not going to be any racism here. That is simply not the case. Even with everything we've talked about with the hurricanes over the last week, even with that, we certainly will make time to talk about some of the other major events that are happening worldwide that I think also reveal dynamics of the system of racism, white supremacy. If you would like to participate, the number to dial 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate, have a question you want to get in for our folks participating beyond the globe. I was really excited for the program today because I suspect that many of the folks who participate many of the folks who participate internationally, particularly, I think many of the black people that are in Europe, the UK area, many of those folks, they have connections to the Caribbean, close family, relatives, friends that are in the Caribbean. So I was really eager to hear some of their thoughts on what transpired with Hurricane Irma and how that was covered and just everything. The devastation is down. That's why we started with the sound clip that you heard today talking about what's happening in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We talked about that yesterday evening on the compensatory call-in. We had a listener dial in from the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Thomas specifically, and she was giving us a lot of details about what she's seen. She was there for the hurricane and the relief effort, racism within that. It was great to have her commentary, her real life documentation to give additional information about what's happening. But really excited about all that. And then, unfortunately, many of our participants had emergencies pop up and things that diverted their attention so they couldn't participate today. We will certainly be looking forward to getting more folks down the road. But even though we don't have all of the folks that I was hoping to have with us today, we still managed to have one of our guests. She's been with us many times before, even invited Gus T on her broadcast. Miss June Allen, are you with us, June?
Yes, I'm with us. Good to be here, Gus.
Good to have you back with us, ma'am. Looking forward to getting your commentary. I'm going to try and add African 1884. He's one of our participants. He's been with us many times as well in Austria. We were having some tech issues for some reason. I kept connecting his line, or attempting to connect his line. Either it wouldn't ring on his end, or he would be connected, and then he'd be there for like 30 seconds and then drop out. I'm not sure what the issue is, but I'm trying to bring him in now as well. Probably make a few efforts, because I was also interested in hearing how this has been covered in different parts of the world. Like, it seems like there hasn't been a lot of coverage of what's happened in the Caribbean, in the States, and just to kind of see what does that look like in other parts of the world. Looks like we might still be having some issues. Oh, are you with us, Jude? No. Still having difficulties, man. I think what I'll do is I'll see if we can ask and get June's perspective on the Caribbean, and then I'll see if maybe we can get African 1884 to dial us, because that is an option as well, and then we can still get his commentary included. But while we're trying to work all that out, with Hurricane Irma and the devastation, and I think a lot of people know about it hitting the U.S. and what damage was caused in Florida and even some other states in the South. The Caribbean specifically, do you have any connections to that area, and how has that been covered in your part of the world in Europe?
Hi, yeah. I mean, my family are from Jamaica, so just from what I understand, from what I read, Jamaica's not, it's not been hit that badly from the hurricane. So, yeah, I mean, so obviously I'm grateful for that, but obviously it's really horrible to hear about all the other stuff that's been going on the other islands, and it's just been really, really devastating seeing what's going on. I find it really quite interesting, actually, just kind of just from what I've read up in the news and stuff about the hurricane, and it's very similar to the clip that you played in the beginning. The tone of it is all sort of very, it's still sort of very colonial, the way that they sort of talk about it. Some of the language that's been used, they're talking about, British territories, and, we're sending in the troops to pick up the British people. Look, it's that sort of tone that I've been seeing a lot and hearing a lot. Which again, it's that whole thing of, well, these people are more important, and even though they kind of sent in stuff, they sent in they went and sent in all their military bits and pieces to help out. It's just there's still that undertone of, well, we're sort of going in to pick up our people, sort of thing, and so yeah, I mean, even like you said, in the beginning, even with all this horrible, devastating stuff going on, there are still undertones of racism that is still being fed through, and it's always difficult. It's always hard. It's always really, really hard. I've also seen the footage on social media about people talking about looting and all of this kind of stuff, and obviously there's going to be people that are going to take advantage of. There's always going to be people that are going to take advantage of situations like this, but I find it really interesting that the narrative has been dominated by that. Not the fact that these people are probably hungry and starving and doing all of that kind of stuff, but I just find it interesting that the narrative is also there's always the looting thing that comes up. It's not that people are hungry and that they haven't got anything and they need support. it's always, oh well, let's have a look at let's put the footage out there at how savage these people are, and that they're just there, looting everything and stealing everything. So yeah, it's just interesting, just looking at the tone of the, again, what comes out in the press and how that's portrayed, and it's always very difficult to see it because I understand it. I kind of know not to kind of. I don't engage with people on social media about that stuff anymore because I understand how the system of white supremacy works. So, yeah, I just see it for what it is. But it's still painful. It's still painful to watch it play out. It's still painful to watch it play out. But I understand it, and that's the point. I know where to kind of place my energy now, rather than trying to getting really, really upset about how white supremacy is playing out again in this situation, in another situation on another level. It's just focus on the work that I need to do and not on what white supremacy is doing. So it's just, again, it's another opportunity to understand how it plays out. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it initially.
Mm-hmm. Folks can go to juneallen.net if you want to get more information, hear her podcast, some of her thoughts, particularly on Black self-care, extremely important. Specifically, I think a lot of Black people in England and other parts of Europe, I think a lot of those folks, a sizable number of them, they have strong connections to the Caribbean. One, you can let us know if you think that's accurate. And then two, if it is accurate, have you seen or heard people responding and talking about what's been happening with Hurricane Irma and the response? And hey, is Britain going to go and help out, since you all have a legacy of practicing racism, colonialism in this part of the world? And, let's pitch in and try and help out. Have you heard that sort of talk amongst Black Britons? Oh, are you still with us, June?
Oh yes, I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I thought you were talking to somebody else.
Oh no, I'm still trying.
So what was the questioning?
Yes, ma'am. I was saying, number one, I had stated that a sizable portion of Black Britons, they have pretty strong connections to the Caribbean, having family, relatives, what have you there. That if that's true, then have you heard Black Britons talking about what's been happening in the islands, and hey, Britain, as a long colonial legacy in this area, practicing racism, they should be responding, they should be helping. Have you been hearing that from other Black Britons?
Not really, actually. I think most of the Black people that I kind of talk to about this stuff, they know the score. They understand how these people, how this government operates, and how, their behaviour over the last few centuries has kind of proven that they're not, that they're going to do what they're going to do. And like I was saying before, I mean, a lot of the people that I know, have not had any family members that have been impacted by it. Thank goodness. So, I've not, most of the Black people that I know, they fully understand that, the narrative, the stuff that's out there about them going to pick up the Britons and all that is what they expect. They don't really expect anything else. And nobody's really, the people that I've been speaking to anyway, then no one's surprised, at the kind of the tone of what's been going on. And yeah, I mean, the whole colonial thing, it just, they're just behaving the way that they've always behaved. If it's not something majorly that's going to make them a lot of money, that's going to give them more power, that's going to, give them something, they're not interested. They're just interested in bleeding other countries for what they can get. And that's always been the narrative, and that's the way that it's always been, isn't it? It's about feeding white supremacists so they can keep doing what they're doing. So the people that I've spoken to have not been surprised at all by what's going on. So it'll be interesting to see, over the next few days, weeks, how this kind of quote unquote rescue mission plays itself out. And yeah, it'd just be interesting to see how it, what they do when they're over there, because apparently they're they're going over there to rescue people and quote unquote stop looting and all this kind of stuff. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how it plays itself out and what will happen. What will happen when they're over there? But no one's surprised.
My view, racists tend to use these situations as opportunities to go do some looting themselves. I think
exactly. Exactly.
Our listener in St. Thomas, she called in yesterday evening, and she was saying that there were armed troops with rifles and huge firearms on their person, patrolling the island. They have a curfew in effect and what have you. And I said, hey, that is exactly what happened during Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath, where tons of people, Gary Rivlin with the New York Times, that's what they reported, that it became a military zone. You just had lots and lots of armed whites. And you had local police officers, you had National Reserve officers, you had private Israeli troops, all kinds, private security, random whites who just went and started stealing guns from houses. Just all kinds of armed whites patrolling the area, and in some instances shooting and killing black people. That's what happened. I remember when the devastation from the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, where you had reports of white people going down there and stealing children and just all kinds. And that's just the stuff that got reported. Who knows about the things that didn't get reported? So that's what you can expect. And these regions in the Caribbean, people, they're kind of forgive the metaphor, but they're kind of off the map anyway. I think June was saying that, a lot of the black people in Britain, they weren't really, this is not like a mass discussion, like we got to go and talk about this. It's certainly not going to be talked about now with the London bombing. And here in the U.S., they're focused on Florida and Harvey. And hey, they got a lot of devastation. They should, that's going to be talked about, should be talked about. But hey, you can go, many people think that when the weather is great, that racists, we can go to these islands and terrorize the black people with impunity, and or terrorize the land, or both, with impunity. Now, oh man, this is prime time looting opportunity right here. So that's just my opinion. I think it's something that we'll be making time to discuss moving forward on the calendar. And again, global system of racism, white supremacy, just in understanding that, I think that can give a more accurate perspective in the way all of this gets looked at and discussed. Anything else you wanted to add to that, June?
Yeah, no, it's just always devastating. It's just always devastating when these things happen. But just it's painful. Just again watching these countries just getting bled again. They're just going to get bled, by white supremacy. And if like you said, if there's any looting going on, it's going to be white supremacy that's going to be looking for opportunities to take over and to bleed, to take advantage of the situation, because that's what always happens, So it's just be interesting to see how it plays out. So I'm going to be watching very carefully, see what happens.
Absolutely. Context of White Supremacy. I'm still trying to get African 1884 with us in Austria, trying to work out all of the tech issues. If you have questions, comment, you want to get in, 641-715-3640 and the code 564943 #. Press *6 if you would like to participate. I did see a hand, but since I brought it up, I did want to ask about the London bombing as well. They've made a couple of arrests. They've allegedly reported that ISIS has claimed responsibility for the bombing on the subway this past Friday. They've had the high terror alert and everything, even though I think they said that they lowered it now that they've made this second arrest. What was, you being in England while all of this went down, what are your observations from what's transpired over the past 48 hours or so?
I find it really interesting that they're not really being specific about the nationality of the person, and yeah, I just find it really interesting. When these things have happened in the past, as soon as they find the person that's responsible, if it's a black person or person of person of color, that stuff is kind of plastered. Their faces are plastered all over the media, and it's just not happened in this case, which kind of makes me think that either the person is white. The person is probably white because they're just not reporting it in the same way. They're being very, very they're holding back all that sort of information about what nationality he is and where he's from and all that kind of stuff. They've said things like they've made some arrests and stuff to some people in Surrey, and one of the families I think was decorated by the Queen for some reason or whatever. But yeah, I just think it's very interesting that the nationality of the person has really been kept under wraps, and yeah, it just makes me think that the person is white, because otherwise it's just the reporting is just not the same, and even on like social media and stuff, I've seen people talking about, oh well, if he's white, then he has to be white converted into a Muslim. They're still trying to turn it into that he has to be somehow linked to some sort of Muslim or whatever. They're still trying to make it a non-white person's fault, basically. So they're still using that as an opportunity to infuse racism about it. And one of the stories as well they're saying is that one of the families, I think they're foster carers or something, and they're saying that these people used to look after refugees. So even though they're not specifically saying the person who did this, committed this act, the nationality of this person, there's kind of like trying to put little side things in to make people think that somehow this person must be non-white. So they're kind of it's still playing out. It's still playing itself out. They're still trying to make people think that this is not a white. This has nothing to do with white people. This has nothing to do with white supremacy. This has to be somehow linked to non-white behaviour or whatever. So yeah, again, it'll be interesting to see what happens when they do finally start putting more information out about the suspect. Again, I'm reading suspected terrorist and not terrorist, which is something that I know white supremacy loves to do. Which is another reason, again, why I think it might be a white person, because they only talk about suspected terrorists when it's a white person. So yeah, again, all the signs are there. All the signs are there. Seeing how white supremacy is playing itself out in these situations. So it's important to understand this stuff, and to just to really be cautious about how it's reported, because you can just see it. It's so obvious when you see how it plays itself out. It's so obvious that it's white supremacy language, white supremacy tactics. It's all about protecting whiteness, and also still finding, even when it may well be a white person, that they're still trying to find backhanded ways to blame non-white people for these sorts of acts. So yeah, it's just interesting to see how it plays itself out, and be interesting to see how it's played out in the media over the next coming days, weeks. And when they do actually, when they reveal who this person is, if they reveal who this person is. So we shall see. We shall see.
I noted that several reports, the BBC, The Voice Online, which I think is a black British publication, stateside, check like the New York Times or whichever other outlets. I haven't seen any photographs, name, no identifying information at all. And I guess if you want to contrast, if you were in London or if you were in England in 2005 for the July bombing, do you recall, if they put out images, photographs of any suspects within the first 48 hours or so?
I'm just trying to think. I can't remember if I was around at that time. But just, even if you just think generally about whenever there is, there's been quite a few, bombings and stuff in London over the last sort of year or so anyway. And there's always put their faces out. They always put their faces out. And they say, "Oh, Muslim terrorists." They love to put all that out. But it's just not happened in this case. It's very, very all kept very hush hush. They're just not mentioning it at all. And I even Googled it today and just put images just to see what images came up about the Parsons, the suspects, just to see if there were any faces that came up. And there was no images at all of suspects that I could find. It was just images of people that were upset and stuff like that were involved in it, that were injured and stuff like that. But thank God no one died or anything. But yeah, there was no actual pictures of the actual suspects. So it's like you said, it's reported very, very differently. But just from what I can remember generally with the stuff that's happened in London, it's very different when it's a person of colour. That you see their black and brown faces on the front covers of the newspapers and stuff. So it's very different. It's reported very, very differently.
For listeners, I was going to say listeners in the States, but really listeners anywhere in the world, I want you to think for a moment. Let's say a subway in New York was bombed and the suspect looked like Lil Wayne. Now, do you think they're not going to release a photo of Lil Wayne as this is a person of interest? New York subway
exactly.
bomb. No name, no release of photographs.
Exactly.
No, I'm like, I can't even fathom that. The way that I have seen black suspects treated for this person stole a 50-cent pack of gum. This person, allegedly, Khalif Browder allegedly stole a backpack, and his treatment, you're going to tell me that this person is or two people, because they've arrested two people and not released any identifying information on either person. Like, why? And I'm just saying that you already I'm just restating. They reported more than 20 injuries, no fatalities. That, just something I thought, oh, wow. And then no release of any information about the suspects. I just look at those two things and say, okay, those are interesting facts from what's been released. Yeah. I would have to look at how this event is going to be used because I think there have been a lot of attacks, particularly over the last 3-4 years. We're very close to the anniversary of 9/11, just weeks removed, or 1 week removed, in fact. We're only 1 week removed.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Actually, it happened the same week. That was Monday. We didn't even get a full week removed. That was Monday.
I didn't even think of that.
You want to talk about how an event is used to manipulate policy in the system of white supremacy? There's no better example than 9/11. No better example, regardless of what you think happened on that day. We can use this to do lots of things, maybe even some things that would have been much more difficult to do had it not been for this event. We can use this for things we want to do. I think some of that happened as well with the bombing 2005 in London. I think a lot of people took that position that, hey, this was another one that got used for a lot of political means for how things operate across the pond. Have to pay attention to see how this, plays out. I think it's pretty close to an election in Germany, right? Angela Merkel is up for re-election. Is that correct?
I'm not sure, actually. I've not seen anything about that story.
Oh, okay. I think that could be the case. Germany, pretty important, quote unquote, country in the system of white supremacy, and much closer to Britain. So, they pay attention when you have major events like this happen, a bombing. Like, oh my gosh, we got to get our niggers in order. This is what happened. Exactly what June was saying. We let all these wacky, dark immigrants in here from Syria and Africa and all these other places, and we got all this Islamization, and they're even corrupting some of our good white people who might have done this bombing. We got to get a hand on this. I think, it could be, I think a lot of that was even said in the Brexit from last summer, and you just have to see how all this plays out. But this event I would pay attention to just to see how things
Yeah,
unfold. I'll leave it there.
absolutely.
I did see Pandora 2. Thomas in New York, did you have a question you wanted to ask? June is with us. We'll see if we can get African 1884 with us as well before we wrap up. Thomas in New York?
No, my question was just going to be about the, how the hurricane was covered. Being that these were a lot of the territories that are still colonialized by the white people. So I think that was pretty much covered. And I guess my question would be how was the hurricanes here covered overseas? Have they been empathetic over there with the news coverage, or has it been tainted news coverage? And that's all I have, Gus.
June, did you hear that question? I guess you're the only one who could respond to that one.
Yeah, was the question about how the hurricane in the States has been reported in the UK? Is that correct? It was a little bit fuzzy, but was that what he was asking?
Yes, ma'am. I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it has been quite sympathetic. It has been, quite consistent. But again, my view is, of course it's going to be consistent because, it's, it's white supremacy, isn't it? Whenever there's white people involved, they're going to, there's going to be a level of empathy and, there's going to be a lot more empathy and stuff to what's going on. So, yeah, I mean, it's been, from what I've seen, it's been quite consistent in the news, and they've been sympathetic to what's going on, and it's been reported quite consistently. They've been following it, so again, there's no surprise there. It's always good. There's a pattern that follows, isn't it? Whenever there's a risk of white people being harmed, it's always going to be prioritised, before anything else. So. It has been reported over here quite, empathetically, and will continue. They will continue to do so.
I don't know if this counts or helps, but I know Al Jazeera. I guess it depends on your view of if you think of Al Jazeera as foreign reporting, quote unquote, or international reporting or an international perspective, but they did a pretty in-depth segment on Houston, Hurricane Harvey from earlier this month, and specifically about racism. And they were early on talking about the pollution in the area and the pollution in the area before the storm that was allowed because the state of Texas is so unregulated. So you have just a plethora of refineries and these oil companies in residential districts where black people live and how they have all these elevated rates of cancer and all that. Like, it was really detailed. That was on Al Jazeera, and then they had additional reporting on how the storm was exacerbating and making all of that worse. But that was Al Jazeera. I guess it would depend on, you count that as an international source. If other folks have questions they want to get in, 641-715-3640.
I have another question.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. I'll be my line for one. I'm sorry, I'm under the 4th Bronx Expressway right now. How has the coverage in the UK been about the Charlottesville incident?
Interesting.
And specifically, how are they picturing Antifa in that region?
Did you hear that, June?
So what was I didn't quite hear the question. I know he said something about Charlottesville and.
Yes, he said, how has the Charlottesville incident, the protests in Charlottesville, the white supremacists were upset about the racist statues coming down, and 3 people were reportedly killed, including this, I think, teenage white woman. He wanted to know how was that covered overseas, in Europe specifically, and then the Antifa, this, I don't know what you call it there, the, I guess, allegedly more aggressive wing of whites who are against the white nationalists. I guess that might be one way of framing it. If is this group, the Antifa group, are they being discussed over there, and how was the Charlottesville incident reported over there?
Yeah, I mean, from what I saw about the Charlottesville thing, I mean, the Charlottesville thing, I think that was reported again because it was a white girl, wasn't it, who got killed. So yeah, the reporting obviously was very, it was hard. It was hard, and I think that they reported it in such a way that was, I mean, obviously because it was a white person that died, it was very. They were obviously empathetic to her, and I even noticed, people like Brene Brown and stuff came out and, were saying things about, a lot more people were speaking up about racism and stuff like that because there was a white person involved. I think this is my view, that I think that they were speaking up a lot more because there was a white person that was impacted in that way. But yeah, I mean, I even heard on some stations and stuff, they were actually saying the words like white supremacy and stuff like that, which I was quite surprised about over here, because they don't normally talk like that. So I was actually quite surprised to hear it. But yeah, it was hard, and I think because it was when it's such an extreme kind. I mean, white supremacy is white supremacy, but when you see, people like the stuff that was going on in Charlottesville, this such an extreme group, the press does tend to talk about it in very, they're a lot more against it in that sense because it is so, it's such an extreme form of white supremacy. So in that respect, from what I saw, the reports were very much kind of, well, it's terrible and all of this kind of stuff. So when it's at that level, then that's when they, I noticed that white people were a lot more vocal about it. But I think it was exasperating because there was a white person that died. Because yeah, it always triggers something different when one of theirs dies. So yeah, it was. I found it interesting that I saw a lot more white people, I would say, speaking up about it. And I think it was because a white person died. But yeah, so it's just interesting seeing this stuff play out. It's painful watching it because when we die all the time in these things, and they're not as vocal. But when a white person is gets involved like this, then it just completely changes the tone of the situation. So yeah, again, this is what white supremacy does. It's a white life is always more important. Devastating. It's devastating for anyone to be killed in these situations. But at the same time, it's like any life is just as important, and the same should be applied regardless. The same should be applied. Black people are getting killed every day, and it's just not the same. But that's how white supremacy operates. That is how white supremacy operates. And I was quite surprised. At how many white people were sort of speaking out about it. But I understand why. I understand why they're speaking up, because a white person was killed over it. So yeah, it's yeah.
Heather here, this 32-year-old white woman, she was not a teenager. The victim who has been memorialized, John Brown of the 21st century, as I have said repeatedly. Not surprised. The Antifa, I think that was the other part of the question. Has the Antifa movement, has that been covered over there, or are you not?
No, I've not heard about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've not heard about that, so I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure about how that's been covered, but
okay.
Yeah.
I know one of Thomas's other research subjects of late has been looking at the different ways that North Korea, Kim Jong-un, that they are discussed internationally. And I think when one of our previous Global Sunday talks on racism, he asked about that, and some of the folks in Europe were saying that they're kind of thought of as a joke, or reported on as more of an amusement, not as, some lethal threat, like, oh my goodness, the European way of life is threatened by these folks. We got to do something. Like, that's just tends to be not the tone, was the way folks talked about them before. We were contrasting that to how they're presented in the States. It seems to be more of a, oh my gosh, something's got to be done type of a thing. What's been the talk the last week or so now that they've had this reported missile launch? Have you heard anything about what's been discussed over the past week or so?
No, I've not. To be honest, I've not been following that story. To be honest, so I have no idea. I've not followed that story.
This will be one. It'll be nice if we have our full complement of folks back for the Global Sunday Talk to see if other folks have heard. I'd be very curious if that changes in any way with this, the missile launch and what have you. If it gets more serious, or if it's kind of the same tone, if that was the consensus from before. I'll be really eager to hear how that plays out as we move forward. I know June, you've been talking a lot about self-care consistently. Anything you would recommend, encourage for listeners to be mindful of, since all of us are under so much constant stress and toxicity from white supremacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is something that I think is very, very important for all of us. It's important for us to be aware of what's going on, but it's also important for us to kind of, to give ourselves time, permission to kind of step back sometimes and really take care of ourselves, because, there isn't a day that goes by that we turn on the TV or we step out of our house and we see, racism, white supremacy playing itself out. We see people being abused, all this stuff that's going on with the everything that's going on in the news. There's stuff going on all the time. There's always a different story that's where our people are being abused and oppressed at some level. So it's important for us to really take time and be really strategic about how we take care of ourselves, because when we're exposed to this at the intensity that we are, it's going to have an impact on our mental health. Neely Fuller talks about, the 9, and also Dr. Wilson talks about the 9 areas of people activity that we're impacting: economics, education, entertainment, labour, law, politics, sex, and more. That's a lot of pressure. And so we have to really make the time to, to take care of ourselves. And it can just be as simple as coming off social media, or turning off the TV for a while and, finding ways to actually release the stress. We're all going to, absorb this negativity at some level, and we have to find, ways that we can release the stress. So, make sure you get plenty of exercise. That, doing physical exercise is going to help release the stress. If you've got a journal, write out, the things that are causing you stress. Be mindful of the way that racism, white supremacy impacts your mental health, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to counteract it. It's very easy for us sometimes to look at all the stories that's going on in the news and kind of, and we can get traumatized by it. We can get upset by it. And sometimes it can be so upsetting that we just get caught up in the next story and the next story and the next story, and we forget how this stuff really impacts us. So it's important to step away when you can. I do it a lot in my home. My home is the only place that I have control where white supremacy comes into my house. If I don't have a TV, I choose not to have a TV. If I want to watch anything, I'll look on the internet. But I don't have the TV on all the time coming into my house, kind of brainwashing me. And that's something, again, that Dr. Wilson talked a lot about. Reading is more important than watching TV. She used to say that quite a lot. But also, it's not just about reading, it's about applying. Take the time to nurture yourself, to take time away from the media and make sure you're getting good night's sleep. If you're not sleeping well, do some journaling to find out, what is underneath all of that. What is underneath the reason why you can't sleep? For me, a lot of the time, it's I've got the racism stuff going on in my head. It's upsetting, and it's very hard to manage the feelings about it. And it's something that I have to manage on a daily basis, especially, doing the work that I do. I need to be able to discharge that stuff out of my body and out of my psyche so that I can show up and speak to people and serve my community and teach them how to take care of themselves. I have to take care of myself first. So, sometimes, I don't know everything that's going on in the news, because there are times where I choose to kind of step away from the media because I need to really take time out for myself. And then obviously when I go back, I do the best I can to catch up and stuff like that. But it's important that all of us as Black people take the time to the spaces where we can control where white supremacy bleeds into our lives, to use those spaces to nurture ourselves and to really take stock of how white supremacy impacts our lives. Because when we can start doing the work in our own homes, when we start doing the work on ourselves, then we'll be better equipped to do the constructive work needed to actually fight against white supremacy. So, it's important to really nurture our Black self-respect, nurture the self-love, so that we can do the work that's needed.
Absolutely. JuneAllen.net. JuneAllen.net. You can certainly go to the website and get more information. Self-care. Great. She even has the code at the top of the page. Taking care of you so we can take care of each other. Absolutely. One thing I did want to get in, if folks, this is not our normal broadcast where it's all super long and what have you. So if you have comment, question you want to get in, you should dial in right now, 641-715-3640, code 564943 pound. Press *6 if you have a question, comment, you want to participate. The whole global warming that has been at least an intense bit of rhetoric and chit-chat over the past few weeks or so. This part of the world, folks have talked about it over here and saying that they just think that's another component of racism, white supremacy, where white people get out and talk about the climate and their concerns. What's your view on this major, issue now that they've been talking about with global warming and climate change?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it is a huge issue, and I think you can't ignore it. But we have to think about, what the future of our planet and the future of our children. But again, there's so much greed. There's so much, the system of white supremacy has control over so many things that they don't care about what's going to happen tomorrow. A lot of these companies, they just care about how they're going to make more money and maintain their power. And to me it just seems like the global warming conversation is a secondary thought. And it's only when things start getting really, really bad, which I think that things are already starting to get, it's already going in that direction. But I think until people really start to see it on their doorstep, that nothing's really going to be, and even when they do sit on their doorstep, are they really going to do anything? Because I think that, these companies, they have the power to control, what happens, and it's just, it's very difficult, because even though, we know that things are changing, and the way that the world is changing is very hard to just kind of and watch it. And a lot of these really big companies have a lot more control over how this thing is going to work, but a lot of them don't really seem that interested. To me it just seems like it's a secondary thing.
I think Thomas in New York and some of our other participants, listeners, were saying that they think that's climate change, that is when whites are in code really speaking to white genetic annihilation, whether that's their melanin deficient problems with the sun and or melanated people, that's what they're talking about when they talk about quote unquote global warming or climate change, however it's phrased. My thing, regardless, it's just very difficult to take white people seriously about much of anything when it comes to doing the correct thing by the planet, the people. Just for me, at least, it is very, very hard to take them at face value that, oh, yes, yeah, we're concerned. We want to make sure that this here planet is well taken care. I mean, they toxify everything. That's what we've been talking about the last 2 weeks in Houston and the hurricanes, that all of these toxins that have been released because of the storm. And they said the same thing with New Orleans. Toxic flood water. I remember that. They said, don't even say that it's flood water. It's toxic flood water because they got so much pollution and what have you in the environment. That's what white people do. That is white culture, a total toxin and pollutant on the planet. But at any rate, I do not see another hand from folks. I assume folks are satisfied. Again, our Global Sunday Talk on Racism, our early broadcast to make sure we can accommodate the different time zones, but we should be here. Oh, there's Thomas in New York. Just let me get the info out for next month, and I'll double check or for your other comment or question. We should be here next month. It's the third Sunday each month. So we should be here next month on October 15th. October 15th. It'll be autumn by then. But yeah, hopefully then we'll have a month to see what has happened with the bombing, to see how that has played out, and hopefully we'll have more participants so we can get a great perspective on that. And then the hurricane situation as well, we can check on that. We'll see what has transpired over the next 30 days. But that should be October 15th, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 Pacific, and for folks in London, that would be 8 p.m. London time on October 15th next month. Global Sunday Talk on Racism. Thomas in New York, did you have a question, comment?
Yes, absolutely. Everything that was spoken about on the show, to me, all ties in together because I connect Antifa with the hurricanes, with the North Korea thing, with that bombing. Just the way I look at the world. But I just wanted to say, as far as global warming goes, all the planets in the solar system are heating up at the same rate. So if it's heated up 5 degrees over the last 25 years here, it did the same thing in Mercury, Venus, Neptune, all of them at the same time. So this isn't a global thing. This is something more powerful than something they can control. And I just think that that's just a play on words. I mute my line, bro. Thank you.
Lots to think about, lots to research, lots to ponder on. I hope folks use your time. It was stated already. Reading is more important than watching television. Make a little time to do some reading, do some study, do some research. Very, very important. I think that, too, helps us combat, work against the system of racism, white supremacy. With that, we will conclude. Also in that vein, I think that metaphor program is coming up this week. I've talked about that. I talk about it every time we do a compensatory call-in with regards to the use of metaphors and comparisons, analogies, and really to make sure that I have some time to explain and I can provide examples from this program and beyond. The many, many times where metaphors are used in conversation and it just becomes total folly in trying to understand anything, just trying to make sense of it. Again, when white people do this, I think that is a deliberate act of racism. Non-white people, a lot of times, I think we are confused. We're still learning, not understanding the power of language. But I think that program could be coming up this week. At minimum, we'll be here for Workplace Racism on Thursday, normal time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Friday for our book club, Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, study session number 7 as we slog through. June, have you read Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth?
No, not yet. It's one of the many books I have on my book list. Not yet. I've got it, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh, okay. In my opinion, you could put that at the back of the book list. That's not one you need to get to immediately. But
really? Okay.
Yeah, that's just my opinion. I just don't find it to be constructive. We're more than halfway through. I think there are many other books that are exponentially more informative than that book on racism, white supremacy. I think there is a reason that white people celebrate that book.
Okay, oh, that's interesting.
Yes, and he was married to a white woman. Anyway, we will be here. Not that would disqualify his work, but that certainly is relevant. At any rate, much obliged for hanging out with us today. It was great hearing your perspectives and hearing just being able to speak with you again, since it's been a while since we've been able to do the Global Sunday Talk on racism, to get you back with us. Again, for listeners, juneallen.net. You can visit the website, the podcast, great information, Yard of Greatness, juneallen.net. Be safe. Take care of your offspring. Hope you and your family are doing great as we transition on to autumn of 2017. For Thomas in New York, other listeners, live or archived, drop an email if you have any, gripes, confusion, guest suggestions. If you can't find something in the archives, just drop us an email, untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Because of my back ailment and then the wisdom teeth extractions at the beginning of the month, I certainly was behind on email, but I am obviously feeling much, much better now. So I will be catching up on my emails. If you sent something over the last month or so and did not get a reply, it's because Gus was, suffering mightily. So be patient. We will catch up with the emails. With that, sobriety would be best worldwide. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. I think racists frequently, they take advantage when non-white people, when we are not able to think clearly and make great decisions because we are under the influence, intoxicated. Lots of illustrations. That situation over in Greece, again, global system. That situation over in Greece at a bar. White people and alcohol is always a bad combination. Always, always, always. Even if you are sober, you don't even want to be around in an environment if it's white people and alcohol, because it can become a lethally dangerous situation in a matter of seconds. You yourself, if you can't be sober, at least get to one spot and stay there. That way you don't have to run the risk of being intoxicated and then being surprised by a race soldier, badge or no. And make sure I also get in my suggestion, if you're going to be in a vehicle, make sure you buckle up. Let's do everything we can to minimize contact with enforcement officials. I know in the States that is grounds for a stop if you are not buckled up. So passenger, driver, in a vehicle, buckle up. Thank you kindly. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.